On the afternoon of October 20th, 1998, 40-year-old Lynn Bryant left her home in the small village of Rwan High Lanes in Cornwall, England. It was a quiet Tuesday, overcast skies, a chill in the air, the kind of day that felt still, almost frozen in routine. She had the day off work and planned to spend it catching up on errands and taking her usual walk with Jay, the family's lurcher cross dog. Lynn was a familiar face in the area. She worked part-time as a receptionist at the local veterinary clinic and was known by everyone for her warm personality. She lived with her husband Peter, who worked as a construction foreman, and they had 2 daughters. Rwan High Lanes was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where the most exciting thing that might happen in a week was a tractor breaking down. Lynn's life was simple, stable, ordinary. That morning, she visited the local post office. She stopped by the vet clinic to chat with her colleagues. Around 12:40 p.m., she pulled into a nearby garage to get fuel. CCTV wasn't common at the time, but the garage owner remembered her visit. He also remembered something else. A white van pulling into the station right after Lynn. The man inside didn't get out, just sat behind the wheel watching. Lynn left the station and drove back home. Not long after, she set out on her regular afternoon walk with Jay. Her path took her down a winding country lane bordered by tall hedgerows, a road she'd walked countless times before. It should have been uneventful, should have been safe. But sometime between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m., Lynn Bryant was murdered. A local farmer driving past noticed something unusual in a nearby field. Jay, the dog, was pacing nervously near the hedge. As the farmer approached, he saw Lynn lying in the grass, motionless. Her glasses were on the ground. Her coat was open. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck, chest, and back. There were no signs of robbery. Her purse was still there. No evidence of sexual assault. Jay was uninjured. The brutality of the crime shocked the entire community. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't random violence. It felt targeted, personal. But no one had seen a thing. Police cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Forensics found no murder weapon, no clear footprints, no tire tracks leading in or out. Just a woman brutally stabbed to death in a field in the middle of nowhere. The timeline was narrow. She was last seen around 1:45 p.m. Her body was discovered shortly after 2:30. In less than an hour, someone had approached her, killed her with multiple knife wounds, and vanished, undetected on foot or by vehicle. Detectives canvassed the area. They spoke to everyone in the village, and they kept coming back to the white van. Several witnesses reported seeing it parked near the lane where Lynn was killed. The driver, described as a stocky man in his 40s or 50s, with scruffy facial hair, didn't look like a local. No one knew him. No one could identify him. And he was never seen again. Despite a massive manhunt, dozens of interviews, and nationwide media coverage, no arrests were made. And within weeks, the case went cold. The murder of Lynn Bryant sent shockwaves through Cornwall. Violent crime was nearly unheard of in the area, and the sheer brutality of her death, in broad daylight along a familiar country lane, felt unreal. The investigation quickly became one of the largest in the region's history. Dozens of officers were assigned. Specialist units were brought in. But progress came slowly. The white van remained the only solid lead. Witnesses had seen it near the chapel where Lynn was last spotted alive. Some even said it was parked along the narrow lane she would have walked down just minutes before her death. The driver, described consistently as a middle-aged man with a beard and a scruffy appearance, had been seen observing the area. But no one could provide a license plate. No one had seen where he went, and he never came forward. Police began combing through thousands of records, white van registrations, known offenders in the region, but nothing matched. They also considered the possibility that the man and the van were just passing through, outsiders never intending to stay in the area. For the Bryant family, grief quickly turned to frustration. The public was eager to help. Hundreds of tips flooded in. Psychics called with visions. Locals scoured the area for clues. But nothing broke the case open. Then came the strange sightings. A few people who lived along the country roads near the crime scene reported seeing a man on foot around the time of the murder. He was walking with purpose. In one case, he was seen turning quickly down a side lane, as if trying not to be noticed. Another woman swore she saw someone hiding in a hedge shortly after 2 p.m., crouched low, watching the road. But none of these leads produced results. And as time passed, memories faded. Timelines blurred. The village returned to its routines, but under a cloud of unease. Lynn's murder had shattered the illusion of safety. Women no longer walked alone. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Doors were locked now. Meanwhile, forensic teams analyzed every shred of evidence they had. Lynn's clothing, the field, the dog's leash, her handbag. They discovered traces of male DNA on her glasses, a partial profile. It wasn't much, but it was something. The sample was stored, awaiting future technology. By early 1999, the investigation had gone nationwide. Police appealed on television. A full reconstruction of Lynn's last movements was broadcast across the UK. Actors retraced her steps. A replica of the white van was shown. Tip lines lit up again. But still no match. No arrest. Then came another strange detail. In 1999, a woman came forward saying she had been walking in the same area just one day before Lynn was killed. She said a man in a white van had pulled up beside her, slowed down, and watched her for several seconds before driving off without a word. At the time, she thought it was odd. After the murder, she realized it might have been more than that. Investigators believed the killer may have been in the area for at least 24 hours before striking. Possibly scouting. Possibly waiting. If that was true, it wasn't random. It was planned. As the investigation dragged into its second year with no arrests, the Bryant family faced the unimaginable, life without answers. Peter Bryant, Lynn's husband, gave multiple public appeals for information, each one more desperate than the last. Their 2 daughters, still in their teens at the time of the murder, withdrew from the public eye entirely. For them, the loss wasn't just senseless, it was haunted by the idea that someone they may have passed on the street knew exactly what happened. In 2001, the case was officially classified as cold. But detectives refused to close it. Behind the scenes, a small team kept working. They reviewed every witness statement, cross-referenced DNA databases, and even traveled across the country to interview potential suspects. There were several men of interest, some with violent histories, others with vague alibis, but no one was ever charged. Then, a breakthrough seemed within reach. In 2007, nearly a decade after Lynn's death, forensic science had advanced. The partial male DNA profile found on her glasses was retested with more sensitive equipment. This time, investigators were able to extract a slightly clearer profile. Still partial, still incomplete, but enough to begin eliminating certain suspects. They compared it to over 600 men during the next 2 years. Every single one came back negative. No match. The frustration deepened. In 2016, nearly 20 years after the murder, police announced a full review of the case. A new team of detectives was assigned, and the public was once again urged to come forward even if the tip seemed irrelevant. The case was featured in national media, reigniting public interest. But it was the emergence of another, eerily similar case that caught investigators' attention. In 1997, just 1 year before Lynn's death, a 14-year-old girl named Kate Bushell had been murdered while walking her dog on the outskirts of Exeter, about 100 miles away. Kate was also stabbed, left in a field near a quiet country road, and her killer had never been found. 2 women murdered a year apart under similar circumstances. Both killed while walking dogs in rural areas. Both crimes unsolved. No motive, no suspects, and no clear forensic evidence. Detectives from both cases began to collaborate. They compared notes, timelines, and witness sightings. But despite surface similarities, no definitive link was found. Different weapons, different victim profiles, different DNA. Still, the coincidence was impossible to ignore. As part of the review, police revisited every piece of forensic evidence from Lynn's case. And in doing so, they discovered something that had previously gone unnoticed, a second DNA sample, found on one of the buttons of Lynn's coat. It too was partial and likely left by someone who had touched her during or after the attack. Both samples, the one on the glasses and the one on the coat, matched. The same unknown male. Whoever he was, he had been close enough to touch her face and her clothes. For the first time in years, investigators felt the net tightening. But the DNA still wasn't in any national database. Which meant one thing. The killer had never been caught for anything, With 2 matching DNA traces and no match in the national database, investigators were now focused on building a suspect profile from scratch. It was a long and tedious process. They knew the killer was male, but everything else was still conjecture. The lack of any other biological evidence, no blood, no fingerprints, no footprints, was telling. The attack had been sudden, brutal, and efficient. He hadn't lingered. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a first-time offender. Behavioral profilers suggested the killer may have been familiar with the area or had at least studied it in advance. The timing, the remote location, the way Lynn's body was left, none of it felt random. It felt rehearsed. And then there was Jay, the dog. Unharmed, found standing near Lynn's body. Investigators believed that either the killer wasn't perceived as a threat by the dog, meaning he approached calmly, maybe even spoke to Lynn first, or that he knew how to handle animals. Perhaps he had experience with dogs. Or perhaps he had interacted with Lynn before. The idea that the killer was someone known to her, even casually, couldn't be ruled out. In 2018, on the 20th anniversary of Lynn Bryant's murder, police made a public announcement. They revealed, for the first time, the existence of the DNA profile. They also launched a new campaign asking men who had been in the area at the time, even as visitors, to come forward voluntarily and provide DNA samples. The appeal was direct: if you have nothing to hide, help us eliminate you from the investigation. The response was massive. Hundreds of men came forward. Old schoolmates, holidaymakers, farmers, delivery drivers, all wanting to help. But once again, no match. Then came the digital approach. Police began working with genealogical experts to explore familial DNA searching, the same method that had led to the capture of the Golden State Killer in the U.S. The idea was simple: if the killer wasn't in the database, maybe a relative was. A cousin, a sibling, an uncle, someone whose partial match could lead them to their man. They submitted the profile for familial searching through the UK's Forensic Science Service. Weeks passed. Then months. And still nothing. But one detail kept bothering investigators. The white van. Despite all the public appeals, no one had ever definitively identified it. It hadn't been a postal van. It wasn't from any known local business. And the driver had never come forward. In one of the witness statements, a woman recalled seeing the van parked in a lobby a day before the murder. It was raining and the man inside was just sitting there, engine off, staring out across the fields. She remembered feeling uncomfortable. Said it looked like he was waiting for something. Or someone. That testimony, buried in the files for nearly 2 decades, was suddenly more relevant than ever. The idea that the killer had been in the area the day before watching meant he might have stayed overnight. Investigators began combing through old hotel and bed and breakfast guest logs from nearby towns. But records from 1998 were often incomplete or destroyed. Back then, most places didn't even require ID. Still, it opened a new line of thinking. If the killer was traveling, maybe on business, maybe passing through, could he have struck again? Or before? The team began working backward, looking at unsolved cases along transit routes, especially those involving knives, attacks on lone women, and rural settings. Several names emerged. Several possibilities. But one stood out. In 1986, 12 years before Lynn's murder, a woman had been stabbed to death while walking alone in Wiltshire, just over 100 miles from Rouen High Lanes. The attack bore similarities. The victim was walking a dog. The murder happened in daylight. The weapon was never found. No suspect was ever identified. Could this be the same man? Investigators submitted a request to reanalyze DNA from that case too. They were closing in. The potential link to the 1986 Wiltshire murder gave investigators a renewed sense of urgency. They had a pattern now, a potential signature. But as they awaited results from the DNA comparison, the Lynn Bryant case took another turn. A man came forward anonymously claiming he had information about a person who matched the description of the white van driver. He refused to reveal his identity publicly but provided details that hadn't been made known to the media. He described a man he'd worked with in the late 1990s, someone who often took trips to the southwest of England. He remembered that the man had been gone during the week of Lynn's murder, and when he returned, he was unusually quiet. Withdrawn. At one point, he allegedly mentioned seeing something bad on the road but refused to elaborate. Police took this lead seriously. They tracked down the man in question, now living under a different name in another part of the UK. He had a history of violence but nothing on his record that would have landed his DNA in the national database. He drove a white van back in the late 90s. He lived alone. No alibi had ever been confirmed for the day of the murder. Investigators brought him in for questioning. He denied everything. Said he didn't know Lynn Bryant, had never been to Cornwall, didn't know why someone would accuse him, but when asked to provide a voluntary DNA sample, he refused. That refusal wasn't proof, but it raised every alarm bell. Police launched a covert investigation into the man's background. They traced his movements, gathered discarded items for forensic testing, coffee cups, cigarette butts, tissues, anything that might contain DNA. It took months, but finally they obtained a usable sample. The result? Inconclusive. There was partial overlap with the unknown DNA profile, but not enough to confirm a match. Not enough to make an arrest. The man remained a person of interest, but without stronger evidence, they couldn't charge him. Frustration grew. By now, the case had become one of the UK's longest-running unsolved murders. And the psychological weight on the investigators and the Bryant family was unbearable. Detectives began re-interviewing original witnesses. Many were elderly now. Some couldn't remember. But one woman stood out. She had been 16 years old in 1998, walking home from school along the main road that day. She remembered seeing Lynn walking Jay as she often did. But she also remembered something else, a man standing near a hedge just off the lane, holding something in his hand. She couldn't see his face. Just that he seemed to freeze when he saw her. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. 20 years later, she realized she may have seen the killer. Her description matched others. Stocky build, 40s or 50s, untidy beard, standing near the path where Lynn was found. Police created a new age-progressed sketch combining all known sightings. They pushed it out to the public once again. The response was modest, but included one call from a woman who had worked at a local pub back in 1998. She said a man matching that description had come in 2 days before the murder. He was strange, quiet, kept to himself. Said he was just traveling. She remembered because he had asked about local walks and whether they were busy. That detail, that one chilling question, cemented the theory police had suspected all along. The killer hadn't stumbled upon Lynn Bryant. He had been planning. Waiting point 2 decades had passed. The face of the man in the sketch had aged in real life, but his presence still hovered over the quiet roads of Wan Hai lanes. To this day, no arrest has been made. No name confirmed. And no justice delivered for Lynn Bryant. Her family continues to fight. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, they release a statement. Every year, they urge the public to come forward, even anonymously, with anything they might know. In 2021, police launched another high-level forensic review using the latest DNA technology. This time, they partnered with international labs exploring trace evidence at the molecular level. Their goal was to create an even more complete DNA profile of the killer. For the first time, they succeeded. With this new profile in hand, they began the process of building a digital family tree, looking not just for one person, but for relatives who might unknowingly carry parts of the killer's genetic code. And then, a distant match. Someone in the UK. A cousin. Not close, but close enough. Investigators reached out. Quietly. They asked questions. Built timelines. Learned about the man's extended family. And slowly, a name began to surface. Someone who had lived in the Southwest. Someone with no criminal record. Someone who owned a white van in 1998. Someone who had left the area not long after the murder and never returned. Police are now working behind the scenes to finalize the investigation. At the time of this recording, no charges have been filed. No name has been released. But sources close to the case believe an arrest may be imminent. For the Bryant family, the wait continues, but this time with hope. Hope that the DNA will finally speak the truth. Hope that someone will be held accountable. Hope that after 25 years of silence, the Coldest Walk will finally come to an end. And Lynn Bryant's killer will no longer walk free.